Hello. Good
Good
morning. We
morning.
won't
Good
be able to
morning.
say that for much longer. Good morning.
I
But
know.
but hi to everyone who's watching now, watching live and watching later. We appreciate you being here, but you are watching us with Living Waters, falling deeper in love with God's Word. And I am one of your hosts, Stephanie Pavlantos.
I am the other host, Lauren Cruz.
So welcome to our show today.
Good morning.
And
Hey,
we
Dar. Good
are
morning.
still doing the Christ Key. We just started this last week and we're going to continue. But why don't you go ahead and make our announcement, Lauren?
Yeah, we've been talking about this, and finally we have nailed down a time, a date, and a time. But Living Waters is going to be moving from Tuesday from 11 to 12. We're going to be moving to Friday evenings from 5 to 6 p.m. I am going back to school in the fall. I'm going to be going back to teaching, and so this time frame will not work out. I'll probably be in the middle of fourth period, so we needed to bump it to Friday. However, Mark with the Lamb Network has promised that the replay will still be noted on Tuesdays from 11 to 12. So if you guys would like to join us live next Friday, we're starting at 5 p.m. live. However, you can still catch the replays on the Lamb Network website. And our replay is still scheduled to be during this time frame. So hopefully you can join us. And I know the concern was that folks will be preparing for Shabbat, and 5 o'clock might not be a good time. However, I think that the majority of our viewers are still folks that have feet in the church and dabbling and interested in the Torah, being a little more Torah and Hebrew minded. And so Friday night might work for you. And if that's the case, that we just truly encourage you to join us. We'll be done by 6, so we're not going to interrupt your dinner times. And we hope you can join us.
Yeah, and it's important to know that it's the Messianic Lamb Network.
Right.
If you go, I think it's actually Messianic Lamb Radio.com, if I'm correct. .com or .org.
It's .org.
.org.
Yeah.
Okay, so Messianic Lamb Radio, because it used to be a radio program, but you can also get there just by putting in Lamb Network, as you see at the back of our pictures, Lamb Network. It'll take you, and what will happen is this screen, when we are live, is the very first thing you see. It's like the very first thing that pops up in front of you, so you can't miss it. You don't even have to look for us. And then we are also, I have a YouTube channel that we're on, and if you again search for my name or Lauren's name, and you can find our replays either on our first Facebook pages, our author pages, whatever, and you will be able to find us. So some of you follow from Lauren's author page, and some of you follow from my Jewels of Hebrews group Bible study page. So yeah, you can still find us. So Dar asked what was the name of the book. It's called The Christ Key. So, and it's by Chad Bird. I know Dar loves books, and she will go and collect books. So.
Somebody else just told me they were reading this book. Julie Coleman. Coleman.
Did she? Okay.
Yeah, she's like, I picked up that book because you guys had talked about it. Also, Julie is in the works of trying to put together a show that will be aired on Lamb Network. So yeah, more.
He said he was hoping she would. So
yeah, more authors to follow.
And then Gina Hood, who also has a show on Messianic Lamb Network, she got the book too. So if you don't know Gina Hood, find her on Facebook, and Julie Coleman. So they're both great women to follow and to learn from, because they both have a lot of knowledge and wisdom. So
yes.
So yeah, so that's exciting. But you want to get started?
Yeah, chapter 2.
So
we're doing one chapter a week, just like we've usually done with our other book studies. One chapter a week. So we're only on chapter 2. So there's still time. And a week, I think, is a good amount of time, because he has study questions at the back of every chapter. And in today, we're actually going to kind of walk through some of them. He has 10 questions.
Yes. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, in chapter 1, he kind of gives you a little bit of background and he talks about the importance of studying the Old Testament. He
Right.
talks about understanding it from, we can't insert our American minds in
Right.
something that was written over 2,000 years ago,
Right.
and more. I mean,
Right.
even 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. We can't insert our American minds in that. You have to kind of change your thinking into thinking like them, but also learning what they said and why they said it the way they did.
Right.
An example of something I was just looking up recently for podcasts I'm doing, but it's when it talks about uncovering someone's nakedness, that's not simply like, seeing them with their clothes off. It has more to do with a sexual relationship than that. So there's lots of idioms and things that are
Right.
said, and sometimes translators just get it wrong.
Right.
And
Well, I think what you're saying is actually a really good segue for question number 1.
Yeah.
So I'll read it and we can talk about it a little bit. It says, in English, we talk about facing the future or putting the past behind us. But how is the Hebrew understanding of time different? How does their thinking of what has been help us understanding the importance of Israel's past? And I made a note. This is actually on page 22. The answer's on page 22. And he talks about the name of this chapter is Walking Backwards to Bethlehem, basically. And looking at different Christophanies in the Bible, but understanding, the future is behind us. And so the word is kudim, and it means not only east, but it's in front of, but also past or the olden days. And kudim is before our eyes. So let me make sure I have the right orientation. And he talks about the word of orientation and how you orient yourselves. But when you're walking, you're actually, so in a Hebrew mindset, you're walking backwards, because what you see, you understand, you can relate to. So that's in front of you. We don't know the past, so it's behind you. We're not
know the future.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry, the future. The future is behind us. The past is in front of us. And we think of it the opposite. We think of the past behind us, the future in front of us. But they're walking backwards. So they're walking backwards into the future. They don't know what it's come from. And I thought it was interesting because the word kudim starts with kof, which means back of the head.
Oh, so that's true.
The future is behind them. They can't see it, but it's what comes from. So kof is, what comes from. So they're walking backwards and they don't have that understanding. But also, and the past is in front of them. It's a completely opposite thinking. So the past is in front of them, so they're able to watch and learn and understand as they're walking backwards. So,
and I think of even when the Bible talks about the star in the east and stuff like that, it's something like the word that it says that their Hebrew word for east means in front of.
Right.
And so it could have been that the star that they were following was not necessarily in the eastern sky, but in front of
them. Right. Which makes sense. If it's guiding them, they're able to walk into it. So,
but if you don't understand their idioms and their way of thinking, then we get things incorrect within the Bible. We mistranslate things.
Right. So it says, we walk backwards. Therefore, in the Hebrew way of thinking, we walk backwards into the future with our eyes on what has been or what will be. The past is our eye to the future. So it's a very different way of thinking, especially as we approach an understanding of the gospel. We're not always looking to the future, but we're understanding and using the past to kind of interpret and help us understand what we're walking into, basically what we're backing into.
Yes. Yeah. And that's pretty interesting because it's true.
Mhm.
The past is something we can readily see and remember.
Right.
So it's
Right.
in front of us, but the future we cannot see. So it's like
Right.
it's behind us because we're walking away. I mean, in our minds we're walking towards the future,
Right.
but because we can't see it, then it has to be behind us
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah. So
So,
very different understanding. And I
yeah.
thought that was just that in itself was pretty key to our understanding of how very different the Hebrew thinking of scriptures is.
Mhm.
And really, it really validates how important it is to know the Old Testament, right? We know this information. They've lived it. They've learned
Yes.
it. Now they're walking backwards, basically, into the New Testament,
Right.
but their eye is still on the Old Testament. So
Because
yeah,
we can also see it in prophecy. So we're
yeah,
in the New Testament, because I assume that's what you're alluding to
yeah,
there, but
yeah.
we are in the New Testament, but the prophecies are in the Old. And but they've all been, for the most part, I won't say all, but obviously everything concerning Jesus' birth has been fulfilled. So we can go back into the Old Testament and see the prophecies and then turn to the New Testament and see how they were fulfilled.
Yeah, he actually has a question. I'm trying to find the question that speaks. He says that he's like, how does this prophecy relate? How does it help us
Hmm.
understand? I can't figure out which one. We'll come to it.
Okay.
All right. So the next one is, with an understanding of keeping our eye on the past. He says compare Genesis 1:26 and 27 with 2 Corinthians 4:4 and Colossians 1:15-17. What's the connection between Christ as the image of God and Adam and Eve being made in the image of God? And here it is. And in what ways is the creation of humanity a prophecy of the incantation? So
Hmm.
there's the prophecy question.
Incarnation or
Let me make sure. Yeah, prophecy of the incarnation.
okay.
So how is Adam, just because Adam is made into a human being, how is that a prophetic indication of Christ coming? And
Hmm.
so this is on page 25.
And if you go to Genesis 1:26, I'll just read that verse and then I think he's got the other verses in here.
Yeah.
So in Genesis 1:26, then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth."
Mm-hmm.
So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created him. Now, something interesting, and I don't mean to open a can of worms, but number one, when we talk about our own image, when it's about like it's God's image, but yet it's because you have to understand too, we often are taught that us is the Trinity, but I recently learned that the Trinity wasn't even a thing in the ancient Near East mind. They wouldn't have understood Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't have understood. So so um so anyway, that's a whole nother subject, but it's an interesting concept. But it said in our image is not necessarily that we look like God in the sense that we can see God and know this is, oh, he's got this hair, this eyes, whatever. It's not about so much of what we are and what we do as much as it is being his image bearer,
Mm-hmm.
being God's representative on earth.
Mm-hmm.
So he created us to be his representative to all people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting, and it's a little different than we've thought, I guess, the way that I've been taught.
Mm-hmm.
But we just like God, just like Jesus is in the image of God because he's the manifestation, the physical manifestation of God.
Mm-hmm.
We are similar to that, not that we're God in any
Mm-hmm.
means, but we're this manifestation of his love, of
Mm-hmm.
his truth, and
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. So those things need to come through us to show him.
I want to read a quote that I highlighted, and I think that might kind of help clarify some of that what you're saying. We look at the Bible and we look for anthropomorphism when God is showing up in human, in a human image.
Yes.
That is the attribution of human-like characters to God. Like when we read it, we're like, oh, that's God because he looks like man. However, perhaps instead, we should see them as ongoing reminders of whose image we bear. So it's not that God's showing up looking like man, but maybe we should twist that a little and remember man was made in the image of God. And so it's not that God's looking like us, but like, oh, this is us every day working out the image of God here on earth.
Exactly. That's a really good point that he made. And yeah. I actually wrote that down.
Yeah, I thought this was another good. This is on page 24. He says, he made man, and then man fell into sin, and so that image was distorted, correct? But then he gave us Christ again to restore the image. Like, hey, he kind of said the image would restore the image. He might be able to create a fresh man after the image, because so we were so distorted that he gave us Christ so that as a reminder of, don't forget, this is the image that you are in, work to look like Christ, he's an image of the invisible God, and so if we're made in that image, then here's our reminder, to kind of recreate that image in God. So I thought that was very different ways of how to look at the Bible.
Yeah, definitely.
We're so often given that, you need to look like these Old Testament heroes. Well, even better, we're not here to look like man. We're here to look like God. We're here to look like the image of God.
Yeah, because the other two verses were that in 2 Corinthians, Paul writes that Jesus is the image of God. And then the
image of the invisible God.
Yeah, and then and then he repeats himself saying Christ is the image of the invisible. So it does help us and just like Jesus himself said, you see me, you see God. You know me, you know God.
Right.
He is that bridge to God, because I remember in my Bible study, Jewels of Hebrews, Jesus came to reconcile us to God. Our sin separated us, and so he is the reconciler. He is the one who restores relationship, who reconciles us so that we can now be children or the sons of God. And I just want to put Dar made a few comments here. She said we should learn from our past to enrich our future. Definitely. But we can't live in the past, obviously. We were actually kind of talking about that before the show. We can't keep living in our past. We need to find healing wherever we have been, because it's easy to live in our past, but God didn't make us to live in the past. He made us to move into a future that he has prepared. And then when the Trinity came to fruition, so I assume that has to do with what we're talking about in the image and in the creation. So
yeah. All right. So question number 3, we'll move on a little bit. It says in Exodus 3, verses 1-6, what names or designations are used to refer to the one in the burning bush? And this is where we start seeing the anthropomorphism. He kind of discussed like that. What do these tell us about his identity and authority? What kind of malach or messenger is this? Now he has on page 25, love this quote, and I think it's so important. He kind of steps on a soapbox. He says, I'm going to rant a little bit. He's like, when we talk about Torah, everybody says the law. And he says Torah means law, like tire means car or eyeball means human, right? So yes, every car is going to have a tire, but not every tire is a car, right? And so he talks about that, and he says, so let's not reduce it to just law. And the way I kind of see it too is everybody beats up on Torah. Everybody beats up on law. They don't want to follow that, but it simply means instructions and teachings. However, they'll go to the New Testament and they'll beat the drum to follow the red letter version of the New Testament, because those are Jesus's teachings. Those are Jesus's instructions.
Right.
They'll fight you about following the red letters, but they'll fight you about not following law. It's the same thing. It's the same.
Yeah, and let's face it, we can't have society without law. So every single day of your life, you're having to obey a law. Whether you're driving, you can't drive without a license. That's the law. You have to have a seatbelt on. You have to obey the signs, even though many don't. Running red lights, like, it was kind of like orange. It's okay to run it when it's orange. And so, so we have laws to protect us. We have laws to protect others from us. You know, there's also, you don't steal, you don't lie. You know, I mean, all these laws are God's part of his teaching, part of his instruction, but there are laws, there are rules that we need to follow to have order in our lives and in the lives of those around us, because without it, it would be chaos. So
it would be. So he's uses Torah as an example, but then he's asking about the word melach. Melach is always interpreted as angel, but it's simply truly messenger. And that's what most angels are, messenger. And so he is saying all angels are messengers, but not all messengers are angels. And so he's introducing the idea that when the Old Testament talks about the angel of the Lord or the messenger of the Lord, we often just go, oh, it's an angel. That's an angel. However, his challenge is look at the language and how is that angel represented, spoken of, described, because in those are going to be the clues to understanding, are we talking about just an angel of the Lord, or are we talking about a messenger being a prophet or Christ himself showing up?
And then even he says on 26, the messenger in this case speaks for God, but is also God. I'm sorry. He speaks for God, but also as God. He is distinguished from Yahweh, but is also called Yahweh. So
he uses the example of the burning bush. And what I did is I went back and I just highlighted clues that help me understand. And in it says the Lord appeared. And then he talks about what that word appeared means.
The angel of the Lord.
The Lord saw. And he talks a little bit about what it means to see. But then it says, I am the God of your father. I am the God of Abraham. I am God. I am God. And so we're not just seeing an angel in a burning bush. We're seeing God. And then he goes through and he gives other examples. You know, he talks about Rahab.
Hagar.
Hagar in the desert, and how she describes God. Talks about, let's see, I'm trying to see the other messenger, Jacob, when Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, you know, how, and when he talks about how he wrestled and all of that, he uses a lot of examples for us to go back and read just a little more detail so that we can see what the clues are to the identity of these messengers.
Right. And then I marked a couple of my favorites. In Exodus 23, verse starting in 20, behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you into the place I have prepared. Be careful. Pay attention to him and obey his voice. So he wouldn't tell you to obey an angel. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression. So this is somebody who can pardon transgressions. For my name is in him. And he talks about that. It doesn't mean his name is on him or his name, it's his name is in him because he is me. He is who I sent, and he takes after me. We are one.
He's saying, like, to you, he's Yahweh. Well, you can't say that of an angel. Like, God can't say, like, here's my messenger he's going to be like God to you. No,
Right.
God would never say that, because then that indicates you need to follow him and obey him. And, he's divine. What he says is divine. But he's saying, my name is in him, and follow him. Listen to him, follow him. Well, the only way he can do that is if he's indicating that I am him.
Right. And
Yeah.
then in Judges 13 was the other one with the parents of Samson.
Yeah.
So the angel of the Lord appears to Samson's mother before, of course, she was a mother.
Mhm.
And so then, and she even says, let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what we are to do with this child who will be born. So she's calling him a man of God. So he obviously, she sees him. And even sometimes it's the word of the Lord appeared, and then they're
Right.
talking to him as if he's a man and a person.
Well, and that's the thing. And we'll talk about that too. The word of the Lord appears. Like,
Yes.
you got to go look at that word appears. It doesn't just mean like, oh, I got this great idea. Like, literally, I can see it. It's in my face.
Yeah, and it talks about him standing in front of you or
Standing.
whatever.
Right.
So that's more than just appearing.
Right.
And then what's interesting about this passage, and I learned this from another teacher, but when she says, or the husband, Manoah, says to the angel of the Lord, what is your name? So that when your words come true, we may honor you. And the angel of the Lord, or the messenger of the Lord, said to him, why do you ask me my name, seeing it is wonderful?
Yeah.
And the word Aleph, its meaning means, I'll probably say it wrong, but it's Phele, but it means wondrous. The word Aleph actually is a letter of the alphabet, and it has meaning as in the pictograph as the father, or the ox, the leader, but its actual word means wondrous or wonderful. And so here is a picture of the Messiah, because we see him as wonderful counselor, mighty God, so it's very interesting that he calls himself wonderful in this passage, but he calls himself basically the Aleph.
Right. Yeah.
So
the last
things like that in scripture.
There is the last little example that I loved. This is actually a footnote, and I'm like totally highlighted the footnotes on page 32, where it talks about the three men that come and visit Abraham. And we always say 3 angels came and visited Abraham, but if you again read the language of it and understand the details of it, it says they speak, and then it says he speaks, and then he speaks and gives the prophecy of the son coming next time. And then the next scene is Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah. There's only 2. And so the idea is that the Lord came with 2 messengers, 2 angels. The Lord gave the prophecy, he spoke, and then the 2 angels are the ones that went on to Sodom and Gomorrah. So
right.
Just it's little, we read through it real quick and we just kind of put our spin on it and our understanding on it, but we've got to get into the nitty-gritty of the details. And even he had one other example of how it says God, the messenger, but yet it's a singular verb that's always used. Well, if it's going to be a plural and it's going to be 2 different things of God is one, and then there's a messenger, an angel of 2 different, these are 2 different entities, there would have been a plural verb because we're talking about 2 different entities.
Right.
But we're talking about one here.
That was
God,
cool.
God, messenger. It's basically God, God, because it's still the same singular verb. So, and that's
the shame. All of our pastors only take maybe 1, maybe 2 semesters of a language. They take a little bit of Greek, a little bit of Hebrew.
Right.
So they never get into this kind of study. And that's why, for me, it was never enough just to listen to my pastor. I always needed to study somebody who knew the language. And I loved the people, like when I met my husband and he spoke Greek, his parents spoke Greek. I got to know and understand a little bit more of the New Testament through what they would explain in Greek and the writing of the New Testament. But then when you get into the Old Testament and you start learning a little bit more of the Hebrew, or you listen to people who know more about the Hebrew, you start learning these little things, these idioms and all these words, the verbs, and how, just all the parallels and all that go along with this. And it's really fascinating, but it also gives you more depth to scripture.
Right. Right. And don't be afraid to dig in a little bit. You know, if your pastor wants to pick one verse to do his sermon on, great. Then go back and look at that verse. Go look at the, I recommend using Blue Letter Bible online, because you can look at every, the verb tense of these words. You can do little word studies of every word. So go and do that. There's also sites where you can see it in English and see it in Hebrew, and read, get all the verb tenses, all the everything right there. So
and don't be afraid to use stuff even like Bible Hub. It's a great resource because you can put in any verse and then hit Strong's,
right?
And then you can see the words in Hebrew, in whatever language they're in, but Hebrew, Greek, or whatever. But then you can click on it and you can find out then where it's used in other scriptures and how it's used differently, but it's the same word throughout.
Right.
So you get a little.
I think you just gave us a good segue for another question, and I'm actually going to skip.
Well, I did 4. I kind of already talked about 4.
I was just going to say, I'm kind of going to skip ahead a little bit, because we've kind of talked about 4, 5, and 6, all within this.
Yes.
It talks about the various uses of messenger and angel. So here's the next question. Number 7, I'm skipping ahead. What are the 2 primary meanings that the word davar can have? And so you were just talking about looking up those words and seeing how they're used differently in other areas of scripture. Davar, I always heard it's the word. Like I always know that it's translated as the word. How do we know the word which Abraham encountered in Genesis 15 was more than just a spoken word? And then compare that to the events of John 1 through 5. So this is on page 33. And the way that davar can be translated, in some cases, it's translated as the word. In other places in the Bible, it's actually matter, like living, matter. Flesh and blood, solid mass, right? And so I think it's so awesome. Invisible, right? And that's the key thing. This davar is visible. He's called the Word. Jesus is called the Word, but then flip that. Jesus is called matter, right? Jesus is called physical. Jesus is in front of us. And so we're able to then, so one of the challenges he says is when you encounter words like Torah or Malach or davar, rather than going straight to the word we think of, use it, flip it. So when we read a verse that talks about, my law is on your tongue, just my instructions, flip it. My angel has appeared, flip it. My messenger has appeared. The word was made flesh, literally. Davar is made flesh. And so we're able to flip it a little bit and get just a little deeper meaning in there.
Yeah, and he gives an example in 1 Samuel 3. So if you have the Bibles, turn there. But 1 Samuel 3, because this is when the Lord calls Samuel, it says.
Right. So, it's wonderful.
And this is interesting, just the first verse. Now, a young man named Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. And then this next part, and there was no frequent vision. So here we are putting together word of the Lord with vision.
Right.
So it was something they saw.
Right. Well, and then here's our reading. We immediately think of, people weren't getting prophetic visions of God.
Right.
No, literally, they weren't seeing God.
Weren't seeing him, right? Yeah. They weren't seeing him. He wasn't appearing to them.
Right.
But then he goes down, and of course, the story. He called to him 3 times. He goes to Eli and says, "What? Why are you calling me?" And then Eli tells him, "Go back, lay in your bed." And the next time he calls you, go, "Yes, Lord, I'm here," or something to that effect. And so skipping to 10, and the Lord, again, the word of the Lord came and stood,
right,
calling us at other times, Samuel, Samuel. So here now he's standing near Samuel. So obviously he's the word of the Lord made flesh.
Right. And he actually on page 34, he talks a little bit about that. He says the verb stood. It's a form of yetzer. It can also be translated as took his stand or presented himself. And so he I'm here. I'm here. You
Yeah.
can see me now. I'm
Right.
going to take my
I'm not
stand. I'm
just
going to present
calling
myself.
you. I came
Right.
to speak to you, and you're seeing me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
It is.
So, but we read all those things and we just think angel, 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 and it's Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. So.
Yeah. He mentions down there, go a little bit further at the conclusion of the chapter. It says, and the word of the Lord appeared again. The word of the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, revealed himself to Samuel by the word of the Lord. And that's in chapter 3, verse 21. So again, we've got more. It's not just the word of the Lord came like, oh, I finally got this great idea. Oh, I remember a word of the Lord, like, oh, I'm hearing things.
Now, it's interesting. In verse 19 in Samuel 3, it says, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. So that's an interesting.
I would want to do a word study on rushed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it almost like he ran towards him. But are we actually talking about the Holy Spirit, I would imagine, and the Ruach, as it's pronounced. So the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him and he went down. So so it's interesting when you start really getting into the nitty-gritty and saying, I'm not going to just accept that as a way I think it means. I'm going to explore it and look, what does it really mean? So
don't overlook the words mean everything. I say that all the time. Like words mean everything, because it's going to be a clue to how we're supposed to use it, how it links to other things. We can't overlook those things.
Yeah.
Too important. All right.
I think I was probably in the wrong chapter there. I may have. Oh, that was in Judges. I'm sorry. That's why you probably didn't see it. I had accidentally turned to Judges 14, and that's where the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, not Samuel.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, I think this kind of goes along with the next question, question 8. It says, compare the narratives of Samuel, 1 Samuel 3, and Jeremiah 1, 4 through 10. What do they have in common? What human actions or features does the divine word take on or show? And I actually was reading on page 35. We get down to he's got like this little itty bitty, I know we can't see it, just a tiny bit of a new thought begins. And I am an annotator. I mean, when I teach reading to my students, I'm like, write in your books.
Yeah.
I mean, that drives people crazy, but you're
an English teacher. I can't help yourself.
I mean, if you have to interact with the text, and the more that you feel it and touch it is going to stick with you a lot more than just reading and hearing. Like, you got to use all your senses. So it says, in the section we just finished, we had to adjust our mind to a more concrete way of thinking about the Word of God. And I wrote, it's more than just a simple personification. Because when we read the Bible, we're like, oh, it's, that's a personification of that word. We're giving human attributes to that idea. So then he says, I wrote that down and I turned the page. To understand the word personified, quite literally, it's not merely in a poetic sense. And I should have finished the thought, but I'm reading the Bible and I'm like, oh, isn't that so interesting? The word is personified, but no, it's literal. Like, we're looking at it as this poetic understanding, but God is saying, like, this is flesh and blood and real. It's not a poem. I'm not writing about a poem. I don't want you to think poetically about the Son of Man. I want you to see how he is flesh and blood in the Old Testament. So
yes, and like I don't want to jump ahead here because I keep doing that, but you have Proverbs 8. And so you wanted to talk about Proverbs 8, but even in the Proverbs, wisdom is personified,
right? Well, this is a great example. So we're like, oh, wisdom is personified as a woman, and lady wisdom, and it's a personification. I want to read Proverbs 8 to you because he spends a lot of time on it, and I love this. I love it.
Yes, it was good.
Okay. Does not wisdom call, and understanding lifts her voice. Okay, we're still talking about wisdom as a woman. Okay, to the top of the heights because of the way where the path meets, she takes her stand. Okay, so whatever this is happening, wisdom is taking a stand now. I'm standing up. Okay, beside the city gates, which the city gates were the place of life and activity. So she's not just standing up anywhere. She's like in life. She's in the midst of the activity. Okay. I'm going to go down. Listen, for I will speak of noble things. I'm opening my lips and I'll reveal right things. And the words of my mouth will utter truth, and wickedness is an abomination. Hang on. Hold on. I'm trying to get to where it actually. In wisdom, wisdom. Okay. Verse 12, 8:12, it switches. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence and find knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, and counsel is mine, and sound wisdom. I am understanding, power is mine. Okay, if this is a personification of a lady, Lady Wisdom, we don't have the right to make those statements. Only God has the rights to say, I am power. Power is mine. Counsel is mine. Understanding is mine. Like, I can't make that statement. I don't care how smart I am. I can't make that statement. Beside me, by me, kings reign. Okay. And rulers and decrees. By me, princes rule. I walk in the way of righteousness in the midst of the path. The Lord possessed me, Yahweh possessed me at the beginning of his ways. Before his work of old, from everlasting, I was established. Wisdom was established. From the beginning of time, in the earliest of time, before there were any depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding in water, before the mountains settled, before the hills, I was brought forth. While he had not yet made the earth and the fields, nor the dust of the world, before he established the heavens, I was there. And when he inscribed a circle on the face of the deep, he made the skies above, then he fixed everything, and he set the boundaries of the sea, and so that water could not transgress his command. He marked out the foundations of the earth. I was beside him as a master workman. And so you've got that whole passage, that's Proverbs 8, all the way up to verse 30, 31. It continues on. It keeps talking about him. So we get that description. And then you read in John 1:1, the word was made flesh. The word was flesh. And I'm going to go ahead and finish that thought, because if give me a second to look it up, because I do not have it memorized.
And then just to go back to Proverbs 8:32, and now, O sons, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. So definitely, it's not just wisdom speaking.
Right. So it says, in the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning. All things came into being through him. Apart from him, nothing came that came to life. In his life, there was life and the light of men. The light shines in the darkness. We were not born of flesh and blood. We were born of God. And so you've got this description of wisdom standing at the foundations of the earth before the earth was even formed. And who has the authority and who has the right to say that but Yeshua himself.
Right.
So the Word, which
the Word made flesh.
In the beginning was the Word, but the matter of things, the tangible physical things.
Right. And when I saw Chad, I wanted to say Chris, I don't know why, Chad Bird in person, he actually said, John could have called him anything. He could have said, wonderful. He could have said wisdom. He could have said son. He could have called him all these different things, messenger of the Lord. But no, he called him Word. And he goes, that's significant that he said it was the Word made flesh.
Right. I think that's great. Yep. That was one of my favorite parts of this chapter. For sure. Okay, let's see. We've got a few more. How are we doing on time? We're doing well. We've got about 10 minutes left. Yeah, and she kind of touched on this question. Why do you think wisdom would be a fitting name for the Father's Son? What is wisdom doing at creation? How does this description confirm that wisdom is indeed divine? Yeah, and then compare the description of wisdom with various New Testament passages. He gives us John 1:1. He gives us 1 Corinthians 1:30. Also Hebrews 1:2-3, which talks about him being the image of the invisible God. Okay, so our last question, Hebrews 1:3 and John 1:14 both echo, if not quote, from other Jewish literature that was roughly contemporary with the New Testament. How would using familiar language and categories help the contemporaries of the early Christians to understand the message of the gospel? And he's saying this because when the early church got together and discussed scriptures, they weren't yet reading anything from the New Testament. Like, these letters came way later. And so how are they able to discuss Christ in the Old Testament? Like, why is it important that we see Christ in the Old Testament? So that's kind of the way he's asking that. And I loved his answer, because his whole thing is walking backwards to Bethlehem. It says all of this, all of the image of Christ in the Old Testament, how it stood before Samuel, how it spoke, how it visited, how it touched, how it burned the lips, how it did, all these images are dress rehearsals. And so that when we finally bump into the manger in Bethlehem, there's the baby, there's flesh, God made flesh. It should completely make sense to us, because we've seen all of these clues that it's coming. Aside from the fact that God says I'm coming, we've seen these dress rehearsals throughout the Old Testament, so that when he is here in flesh, we can recognize him.
Yeah, he even this is a good quote. He says, C.S. Lewis calls the incarnation the central event in the history of the earth. And he's not wrong. The whole of history prepared us for this event, and the whole of history afterward has been affected by it. God gave us much in Adam, and we lost much in his rebellion. But we have gained infinitely more in Christ than we ever had or lost in Adam. One might venture to say that Eden was fulfilled in Bethlehem, creation in incarnation, since he in whose image we are made himself one with our nature.
Right. So I was thinking through as you were reading that, if we're walking backwards into the future and we bump up against Yeshua or the manger, like because we're not looking where we're going, so we're going to bump into him, we infer what we're running into based on what we've already passed.
Right.
So if we've seen him this way, we've seen him this way, we've seen him this way, there he is again. That when I bump into something, what should I assume that it is? Well, it should be another example of him, because that's all I've been looking at. That's all I've seen from my past. So
yeah. So the challenge is to every book of the Bible you read, find Jesus in it somewhere.
I wrote that. I actually wrote that on the. Let's see if I can find my quote that I wrote.
Because where is he in Leviticus?
Yeah.
I mean, actually, in my podcast, Grafted Jewish Roots of Christianity, I interviewed one of my very first guests was Aaron Imey from Jerusalem. He's an Australian man who is actually more like what we might call missionary. He lives in Israel now, and he's part of the a church there, which has just left my mind. But he, he kind of talked about like we're oh my goodness. I explained so much that I forgot, but he talks about all of this, and he talks about even how we're all missionaries. It's all of our jobs. You know, we can't not call ourselves a missionary, but taking the word of the Lord everywhere. But sorry, but that's not what I was going to say. But what did you just mention about backing up?
Backing up and reading the New Testament, asking yourself, where is Jesus revealed, or how is Jesus revealed?
So Leviticus, it's his favorite book. And he said, thank you. It's like old age. My mind's just getting lost. But he talks about Leviticus being his favorite book. And he goes, Jesus is throughout that book.
Right.
And he goes, and it's interesting, even in Hebrew, the word and there are certain, often in Hebrew, you have, like, they didn't have capital letters. So if something was made larger, a letter was made larger, it was significant. And we find that in Leviticus, in the very first couple of verses, one of the words made larger. And that kind of goes back and has a meaning like that's someone, not just a letter, but it's representing the Lord, or it's representing Jesus in that way. But he is that burnt offering. He is that high priest. He is the altar. He is all those things. He's the menorah, the light that's all within the temple that they're building, and all the things that they're implementing. He's there because he is all those things. When Moses looked into heaven and saw the pattern, he saw the Son of God. So it's just so interesting and so full of meaning, but we tend to just skip over those books.
Yeah, Chad says it all the time because I do listen to his podcast as well. You know, so try this. The next time you read something in the Old Testament, instead of saying, what's the lesson I need to learn, right? Like we read about the flood and we're like, oh, what's the lesson? Well, we need to learn to obey God. We need to learn, to live righteously, that's not the lesson. Like, instead of saying, what's the lesson for me to learn? Ask yourself, how and where do I see Christ? How is the gospel represented? And we talk about that. We talk about the gospel as only a New Testament thing. Torah is called the gospel, the message, the good news. Torah is called the good news.
Yeah, it's not in the New Testament first. It's in the Old Torah
Testament
first.
Right. But we think of that as a New Testament word. Okay.
Instead,
why don't we look for the good news of Christ in the Old Testament when we read? Instead of saying, how can I act like David? How can I be a man after God's own heart? No. How is Jesus represented in this story? And it's not that we're supposed to live like men of old. We are to live like Christ. And so how is Christ revealed? How is that mercy? How is grace exemplified? How is mercy revealed? How is the loving kindness? How is the light separated from the darkness? That's what we're supposed to be looking for. And to think of, rather than approaching the Bible as law, approach it as relationship. How does God explain how we can have a better relationship with him? Not what's the law I have to follow? I'm going to be judged.
Right. Because it is so much about relationship.
It is.
And I remember having a conversation with somebody and talking about, he brought up the fact, he said, what's more important, obedience or relationship? And how different people answered that. There were people who said obedience. And he goes, no, it's relationship, because out of the relationship, you will be obedient.
Right.
You don't have to worry about that, because if you're in relationship with him and you love him and you keep wanting to be like him, then the obedience will be second nature. You'll
you'll desire it. I can't wait to obey you because I love you that much. It's not like I'll do it because I have to, and that's what you tell me. It's like I will.
It's not work.
Gladly do for you. Yeah. Yeah.
And think about even your prayers. I heard this said, you can tell a lot about a person by what they pray for, what they pray about. If your prayers are consumed, and this I have to say really affected me, and I think it was you, Lauren, who said it actually, but I think you said it in one of your books. I'm not sure, but I think it was you and I had this conversation. But if you are praying to be more like him, if you are praying to be more like Jesus, to be maybe not to, Lord, I don't want to be deceived. Lord, I want your truth. I want to know your truth. I want to love your truth. I want to love your word. I want to follow you with all my heart, soul, and mind. If those are your prayers, then that's the desire of your heart. But if you're just constantly praying, Lord, I really need this. Lord, I really need that. And Lord, would you just like set them straight because they are so wrong? And Lord, would you just make them give this to me? What are your prayers like? Who are you praying to be like? Or are you even praying to be like him? So it says a lot. It's just like the old saying I remember hearing as a kid, if someone were to look in your checkbook at that time, we had checkbooks.
Right. What would they see? How are you spending your money? Yeah.
Right. Because are you giving it to people for charity? Are you supporting people? Are you helping people? Are you giving it to the Lord to use? Or is it all used on yourself? It tells who you are and what your motives are. Right. And your prayer life is such. And I remember even in when we were doing Strength of a Woman, I mean, to pray for our spouses, to pray for our children, those are good things because those are, we want to pray for our spouses because we're in relationship with them. Right. So it's important. And praying that our spouses and our children will be more Christ-like, will be more like him, will love you more, will experience you, Lord, in the way that you want them to experience you. Right. Those are the prayers we need to pray.
Those are the prayers. Yeah. I agree. And I don't think I said that, but
it seems
I'm not going to take credit for that, but that's a great point. Yeah, great point. For sure.
I know you said about praying for your spouse, so I do know I got
that. Yeah. For sure. And your children. Pray for your kids.
And your children, of course.
Yeah.
All right. It's easier. Pray for my children, because I'm like,
I don't know. It depends on where the kids are. Like if you've got a kid that's a parable, like I don't think they want to hear my prayers about that. I'm like, God, invade that life. They may not like when I'm praying for them.
Well, we're running out of time. We always have good time.
So next week is chapter 3. Next week will be Friday night, 5 p.m. Yep, that's going to be our new time.
Eastern Standard Time.
Yep. If you want to watch us live, 5 o'clock, you can put the phone up next to while you're making dinner and just watch us. It will be rebroadcast on Tuesdays during this time, but I can't do it live anymore after August because I'm going to be with my 9th graders. She's giving me 9th grade. Oh, I used to teach seniors. I like seniors.
The older the better.
Oh, I know. The older the better. Next week we are going into chapter 3. So get your book and keep up with it. It talks about how Old Testament individuals outlined the Messiah's colorful life. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll get a little more information on it. So
sounds good.
I will go ahead and let's see. I don't have anything pulled up for me. So,
I got it all.
Do you? Okay, I'll let you write us out. Thanks for joining us today.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.